You wake up in the morning and for a brief second before your mind remembers your name, your plans, your regrets, there is silence, a strange stillness like a clear pond before a stone hits the surface. In that moment, there is no story, only presence. And then instantly the rush begins. Your phone lights up, the world floods in, and the question returns like a ghost: who are you really? Are you the name on the screen? The voice that answers when someone calls? Are you the image you see in the mirror? Or the memories you keep like old books stacked in your mind? The truth is, most people never find out. They live their entire lives inside a costume stitched together by habits and expectations, a mask they learned to wear so early they forgot what. Their real face looked like William James, the father of modern psychology, believed that our sense of self is not a fixed thing, but a living process. He called it a stream of consciousness, because it never stops moving. It changes shape, depending on where you are, who you are with, and what you are doing. But beneath that stream, he believed there is something quieter, something deeper that watches the flow without being swept away. Think about it. How many times have you changed just to fit? You smile when you are tired. You laugh when you do not feel like it. You hide your sadness because you have work to do. And slowly you become what the world rewards, not what your heart whispers. And yet there are nights when you feel it, that ache in your chest, that question that rises like heat from the dark, asking if this life you are living is truly yours. The pain comes not from what you lack, but from the distance between who you are and who you pretend to be. James understood this. Before psychology even had words for it, he said that the self we experience is made of many parts. The material self, our body possessions, our clothes, our social self, the way we act around others, and the spiritual self, that quiet inner core that watches everything silently. We confuse these parts all the time. We chase new clothes and titles and relationships, hoping they will make the ache go away. But they never do, because we are feeding the costume while starving the soul. It is not your fault. This confusion begins early, when teachers praise you for being good, and parents smile when you follow rules, and friends like you when you agree with them. And so you learn that love is conditional, that belonging means shape-shifting, that worth means pleasing the mirror of others. You spend years polishing your reflection without realizing that the reflection is not you. It is just light bouncing off the surface of a pond, while the water beneath holds something far more alive. We live in an age that makes this even harder. Our phones, our feeds, our photos, they turn identity into performance. Every click becomes a mirror, and every mirror a trap. The more we perform, the less we feel. The more we compare, the smaller we become. Imagine, for a moment, that you could meet yourself, not the version you show online or at work, but the one who wakes up before dawn when the house is silent. What would you say to them? Would you recognize them, or would they feel like a stranger? This is where the search begins, not in books or theories, but in the quiet space between one breath and the next. If you listen closely, there is something beneath the noise, something ancient and steady. It does not care about likes or labels. It simply knows, and waits for you to remember it tonight when the world grows still. Try this simple thing. Sit for a moment before sleep. Turn off the light and ask softly, who was I today, and who was I pretending to be? Do not judge the answers. Just notice them. Noticing is how you begin to wake. The danger of living without knowing yourself is not just emptiness, it is exhaustion. You will try to fill the hole with goals, with approval, with distractions, but nothing will stay long enough to rest your heart, because nothing external can complete what is internal. And yet the moment you turn inward, the moment you dare to see the parts you have avoided, something changes. The weight begins to lift, not all at once, but gently, like dawn rising after a long night. The mask starts to crack, and through it breathes something real. This is not about rejecting the world or your roles. It is about remembering that you are not limited to them. James would have called it a reconciliation, a coming together of the many selves into one continuous flow. Every human being carries both the actor and the witness inside. The actor performs, loves, fails, wins, loses. The witness simply observes when you forget the witness. You drown in the role when you remember, and you can play freely without losing your depth. Maybe that is what freedom truly is, Not the absence of duty, but the presence of awareness tonight, after you ask who you were and who you pretended to be. Add one more question: who watched it all? Unfold that watcher is closer to who you really are than any name or title could ever be. And when you start to see from that place, the world changes color, the noise grows softer, and life begins to feel like something you are living, not something. That is happening to you. Most people move through life like actors who forgot their lines halfway through the play, yet keep performing because the audience is still watching. They wake up every day and slip into their roles without even thinking about it: the worker, the friend, the partner, the achiever. And in every role there is a script they did not write, but learned from those around them. They wear it so well that when silence comes, they panic, because without the noise of doing, they no longer know who they are. William James believed that this constant performance creates a split inside us between the self that acts and the self that knows he saw, that our minds are like a crowded theater where thoughts and feelings come and go like characters on a stage. But somewhere behind the curtain, there is the true observer, the one who never leaves the show even when the roles change, and that quiet presence is what he called the pure self. The problem is, we rarely give that presence time to speak. Our culture teaches us to measure life in outcomes, not awareness. We celebrate the visible things, the grades, the titles, the numbers. While the invisible part of us grows quieter every year, we think knowing ourselves means having opinions or preferences, but those are just the surface ripples of a much deeper sea. James once described consciousness as a stream because it is always moving, yet we treat it like a frozen pond, trying to hold one version of ourselves in place for years. And when the ice starts to crack, we panic. But maybe the cracking is not the end, it is the beginning. Take a moment to imagine a woman named Clara. She has spent 10 years climbing the corporate ladder. She is smart, efficient, and respected. Everyone sees her as strong. But every night when she turns off her laptop, there is a hollow feeling inside she cannot explain. One evening she finds herself staring at her own reflection on the dark computer screen and realizes she does not recognize the person looking back. She whispers softly, "When did I become this tired?" The next morning she writes a note to herself on a sticky pad saying, "I want to remember what makes me feel alive." And for the first time in years, she leaves work on time. That tiny act of rebellion becomes a doorway. It is in those small cracks of honesty that the real self begins to breathe again. James would have said that Clara is beginning to shift from the social self to the spiritual self, from the outer to the inner. And this shift is not about abandoning success. It is about asking a deeper question: what part of me is driving this pursuit? Is it fear or is it meaning? So many of us chase achievement, not because we love it, but because we fear being unseen. Yet every accomplishment that comes from fear only deepens the hunger. The only thing that can satisfy it is truth, and truth is found in awareness. Try something tonight. When you are alone, close your eyes and think of the 3 words people most often use to describe you. Maybe they say, kind, hardworking, funny. Now ask yourself, are these words who I am or who I learned to be? If even one of them feels like a costume, take a breath and imagine setting it down on the floor beside you for a moment. What remains is not emptiness, it is openness. The space where you can finally hear your own thoughts without an audience. Listening. William James believed that attention is the key to identity. Whatever you focus on expands. So if your attention is always on others' expectations, your self will take their shape. But if you turn your attention inward, the self begins to reform like water, finding its original flow. He once said that the greatest discovery is that a person can change their life by changing their attitude of mind. But this change is not a trick or a technique. It is a remembering. It is noticing what you have been ignoring, the parts of yourself you pushed away because they did not fit the image. There was a young man James once wrote about who lived in constant anxiety about his future. Every day he felt like his worth depended on his next performance. One afternoon, while walking through a forest, he stopped by a stream and watched the water flow. He realized that the stream did not struggle to move. It simply followed the path carved by time. He sat there for hours and felt his thoughts quiet. He later wrote that in that moment, he felt himself fall back into something larger, as if he were both the watcher and the watched. This is the kind of peace that appears when you stop trying to fix yourself and start witnessing yourself. You can try this too. The next time you feel anxious about something that might happen, step outside for a minute and observe something simple. The sway of trees, the rhythm of your breath, the sound of footsteps on the ground. And remind yourself, I am the one who notices this small awareness, is the bridge back to your center. And the more you cross it, the stronger it becomes. James was fascinated by the idea that the self is not a single point, but a relationship between the inner observer and the outer world. The two need each other. The observer gives meaning to the experience, and the experience gives shape to the observer. When we forget this relationship, we lose balance. We start to believe that our worth depends on external validation, that our lives only matter when they are seen. But when you begin to live from the awareness of the witness, you realize that life is meaningful even when no one is watching, even when it is quiet, even when it is ordinary. Clara later said that the day she wrote that sticky note was not the day she changed her job, but the day she began to see herself again. She stopped trying to live up to the version others expected and began to listen to her own rhythm. She still worked hard, but with a different energy, one rooted in curiosity. Not fear. That is what awakening looks like. It is not loud, it does not announce itself. It begins in small acts of honesty that turn into a life that finally feels your own. You might notice as you listen that your mind tries to label what you hear to turn it into advice or motivation. But this is not about motivation. It is about recognition. The recognition that you are already whole, that beneath the layers of performance and expectation, there is a quiet presence watching, feeling, living. You do not need to find it. It is already there, waiting for you to stop running long enough to notice its warmth, waiting to welcome you home. There comes a point in every life when the old story begins to crumble, and the familiar walls that kept you safe start to feel like a cage. You can sense it in small ways at first. The conversations that drain you, the goals that no longer excite you, the way your laughter feels rehearsed instead of real. It is not that something new has appeared. It is that the old illusion has started to fade, and behind it, a truer voice is trying to speak. William James understood this process. He saw that the self is not a fixed identity, but an evolving field of awareness that grows through conflict and choice. Every time we face a contradiction inside ourselves, a moment when what we do no longer matches what we believe, we are invited to meet the deeper layers of who we are. But most people run from this discomfort. They distract themselves, they change the scenery but not the script. Yet the real transformation begins when you stop running and begin to listen to the quiet voice that keeps saying, "This is not me." Imagine a man named Ravi who has always been the peacekeeper in his family. He solves every problem, smooths every argument, always makes sure everyone else is comfortable one evening after a long day of trying to hold everyone together. He sits alone in his car and feels a strange emptiness, as if something inside him has finally gone silent for a moment. He does not feel peace, he feels loss. He realizes he has spent so long being what others needed that he no longer knows what he needs that night. He writes in his notebook, "I do not know who I am when I am not fixing things." And in that simple sentence, his true self begins to whisper back. James would have called this a crisis of the social self, a breaking point where the image we built no longer fits the life we are meant to live. To face such a moment requires courage because the self we have built is familiar. It gives us identity and control. But the deeper self asks us to let go, to trust something unseen. James wrote about the difference between the I and the me. The me is the story we tell, the roles we play, the possessions we collect. But the I is the pure awareness that observes all of it without being reduced to any of it. When Ravi begins to sit with his discomfort, he starts to feel that observing presence. It does not give answers, but it gives space, and in that space a different kind of peace begins to form, a peace that comes not from control, but from acceptance. You can try this too, the next time you feel restless instead of reaching. For distraction, pause and notice what is really moving inside. You do not label it. Do not rush to solve it. Just sit with it for 60 seconds and say quietly, "I see you." That small act of acknowledgement is how the deeper self begins to speak to the surface self. James believed that what we give attention to becomes real, and when we give attention to our own awareness, it strengthens our connection to the authentic self. Another story comes from a young artist named Lila, who always created for others. She painted what sold, not what she loved, one afternoon while working on a commission. She suddenly put down her brush and realized she hated what she was painting. She sat there for a long time, staring at the canvas, feeling both fear and freedom at once. Later, she began a new piece, one that made no sense to anyone else, but for the first time in years, she felt alive. She said it felt like a storm clearing in her chest. James would have said that this was the moment when her spiritual self overruled her social self, the moment she stopped performing and started expressing. In every human being, there is a quiet rebellion waiting to happen. It is the soul's way of reminding you that you cannot trade truth for comfort forever, and when that rebellion comes, it will not destroy you, it will liberate you. But liberation is not glamorous. It often looks like loneliness, confusion, or loss, because the old self has to dissolve before the new one can emerge. James saw this as a natural part of growth. He said that the divided self must first break before it can be reborn whole. You might notice this in your own life, in the way certain people no longer feel aligned with you, or how old ambitions fade without warning. It can feel like failure, but it is not failure. It is metamorphosis, like a snake shedding skin that has become too tight. There is nothing wrong with the skin. It served its purpose, but now it must go tonight. If you can take 5 minutes to sit alone and ask, what parts of me are too small? Now, what am I still holding that no longer fits? Write down the first thing that comes and do not argue with it. Just let it be seen. That is how change begins, quietly, without force. William James once observed that most people live with only a fraction of their true potential because they never awaken the deeper layers of consciousness. They remain identified with their habits and fears, believing those patterns are who they are. But when you catch even a glimpse of the witness behind it all, your perspective shifts. Suddenly, you are not the storm. You are the sky watching it. And that realization, however brief, can change everything. Ravi eventually stopped trying to fix everyone around him. He started taking quiet walks after work and learned to say no without guilt. He discovered that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of boundaries. Lila continued to paint from her heart, and though some clients left, new ones came who valued her honesty more than her polish. Their stories remind us that the true self does not demand attention. It simply waits for us to stop pretending long enough to return to it. This is the slow, gentle work of remembering who you are, beyond the noise, beyond the roles, beyond the masks. It is not about finding yourself as if you were lost somewhere outside. It is about noticing that you have always been here, watching, waiting, breathing. Beneath every version you have ever played, when you begin to live from that awareness, you realize that nothing is missing, that the peace you were chasing was never gone, it was only covered. And now, as you begin to peel away the layers, you feel the first real breath of your own life moving through you again. There is a strange quiet that comes when you start to live closer to your real self. It is not the kind of silence that feels empty or lonely. It is the kind that feels alive, like standing in a forest after rain. Everything glistens. Even the air feels different. When William James spoke about the nature of consciousness, he said it moves like a stream, and you can either fight its current or learn to flow with it. Most of us have been fighting for so long that we forget how to float. We are trained to control every moment, to manage every feeling, to force our lives into neat shapes. But the deeper self cannot be managed. It can only be met, and meeting. It means surrendering the need to always be right, always be certain, always be busy. There was a man named Omar who lived his life chasing validation. He was good at what he did. People admired him, but no compliment ever felt enough. One day, after receiving an award he thought he wanted, he went home, sat in his dark apartment, and felt nothing. It was as if all the noise around him had been switched off, and what remained was a vast silence that frightened him at first, then slowly drew him in. He realized that his entire life had been built on the approval of others, and in that moment he saw how fragile that structure was. He began to ask himself questions he had avoided for years. What would I do if no one was watching? Who am I when the applause stops? And those questions did not give him answers, but they gave him direction. James would have called this a moment of radical awareness when the social mask begins to dissolve. And the authentic self starts to breathe through the cracks. He wrote that every person has a certain energy, a vital feeling of aliveness that grows when we align with our true interests and withers when we betray them. Omar started small. He began taking walks without his phone, leaving the world behind for an hour each evening. He noticed how his thoughts slowed down, how his breath deepened, and how the constant pressure to perform began to ease. He discovered that joy was not something he had to earn, it was something that appeared naturally when he stopped pretending. You can try this tonight. Choose one small ritual that belongs only to you, something that requires no validation. Maybe sitting quietly with tea, maybe writing one honest sentence about your day, maybe standing by the window and watching the night without needing it to be anything else. These moments teach you to come back to yourself. They remind you that awareness itself is enough. There is a woman named Hannah who spent years in relationships where she gave too much, always pouring herself into others. Hoping to feel complete one day after a painful breakup, she found herself walking along the beach, feeling both empty and strangely free. She picked up a small piece of sea glass, smooth and pale green, and realized it had been broken once, but the ocean had shaped it into something beautiful. She thought, maybe that is what I am, too worn, but softened by time. That night she wrote in her journal, I will stop trying to be needed and start learning to be whole. James would have seen this as the work of individuation, a concept later echoed by Jung, the process of becoming who you truly are not, by rejecting your experiences, but by integrating them. Every human being has moments when the inner and outer selves collide, when the image you show the world cannot hold the truth that lives beneath it. This collision can feel like collapse, but it is really an awakening, like a shell breaking open to reveal the living creature inside. The danger is that most people patch the shell back together. They run from the discomfort back into the safety of the familiar. But those who stay with the breaking, those who breathe through the uncertainty, discover that the pieces of the old self are not lost. They become the soil for a new kind of growth. Try to remember the last time you felt truly alive. Maybe it was not during success, but in some quiet, ordinary moment. Maybe laughing with a friend. Maybe watching light move across the floor. That aliveness is your compass. It always points toward truth. James believed that the key to freedom was selective attention, that if you learn to direct your awareness toward what is real and meaningful, your life will start to reflect that energy. When you spend your days focused on fear and comparison, your self contracts when you focus on presence and sincerity. It expands. Omar and Hannah both began to live from this expansion. They did not become saints. To sages, they still made mistakes, still doubted, still struggled. But the difference was they no longer ran from their truth. They began to treat their feelings not as problems, but as messages, and slowly the noise of their old lives faded, replaced by something quieter and steadier, the sound of being rather than performing. You might notice this in your own life, in the way certain people no longer feel aligned with you, or how old ambitions fade without warning. It can feel like failure, but it is not failure. It is metamorphosis, like a snake shedding skin that has become too tight. There is nothing wrong with the skin. It served its purpose, but now it must go tonight. If you can take 5 minutes to sit alone and ask, what parts of me are too small now? What am I still holding that no longer fits? Write down the first thing that comes and do not argue with it. Just let it be seen. That is how change begins, quietly, without force.